All right, everyone. Now it's time to talk about stereotypes. This is applicable to film, music, and other mediums of entertainment, but there's something more pernicious. I was thinking about this the other day. I got thinking about the noble savage mythology, because I saw a meme on Twitter, and it was like from Avatar, and it's like before and after you learned about the history of pre-colonial so-called native people in the Americas. It's like at first you're like, you want to be one of the blue-skinned people praising the trees. And then when you realize how things really worked, you sort of turn into a super soldier and you're like, damn, the colonialism thing wasn't necessarily as bad as what was already there. Building roads is kind of important, by the way. But then I got to thinking, it ties in with a long series of stereotypes that I've witnessed in books, film, and all of these other things. And there's an undercurrent there, an undercurrent of propaganda, and a lot of hypocrisy. For instance, let's consider the noble savage mythology. And this is a recognized facet of anthropology. There was never a time in the pre-colonial Americas when people were actually painting with all the colors of the wind and talking to willow trees and stuff like that. The fact is that the average life that was lived then was not demonstrably different from the average lives being lived by other generally rural people around the world. And you don't see a similar mythology, by the way, with any other rustic culture anywhere else in the world. Why? Because it was entirely invented in the romanticist period. Yes, indeed. What happened is that people were thinking about the rural, primitive, in some cases prehistoric and pre-literate traditions of these proud braves. And they developed a bunch of stereotypical bullshit about them. Oh, they were living in nature. It must have been so nice. Because they were looking around at the coal smokestacks. And in the Romanticist period, because of a period of volcanic eruptions, actually, you had bizarre weather patterns, and some of the weird abstract colors that you see from Impressionism, etc., they actually come from climactic conditions at the time, influenced by volcanism. That's just some art history as an aside. During this period of time, industry was roaring ahead, and tuberculosis had broken out. The White Death was very prevalent. A lot of people died in infancy or in childbirth. Things were not necessarily great for the average person. A bunch of wealthy, literate people with even wealthier sponsors went out to go see the trees and paint paintings and write poems, and they got it into their heads that the people that lived here before all this coal and oil and trains and shit like this, must have been way, way better. It turns out that wasn't actually the case. They were scalping each other and raping each other and taking hostages, and there was never a noble savage. The whole concept, by the way, gets promulgated much later on. Yes, in the atomic era, cowboy movies and cowboys, spaghetti westerns and stuff, they start promulgating. What are some of the stereotypes? There's the young tyro, the brave. He's got some problems. He's too aggressive, but at the end, he saves everyone. He saves his tribe. He's not aggressive because he's a bad person. He's just very stalwart. He really believes in the traditions of his people. Then you've got the wise elder, usually guiding the young brave. And the wise elder realizes he's at the end of his life. There are literal episodes of like Gunsmoke that fixate on this. And his whole goal is he saves the white person from himself. There was an episode of Gunsmoke, I can't remember which one. I think it was in season 4 or thereabouts. It was one of the earlier ones. And there was this old noble savage, this old Indian brave, with feathers and everything else. And Festus found him in a cave, and he was, doing the dying ritual thing. And Festus is like, well, you're not even sick or anything. He basically kidnaps him, brings him back to society, to the white man village. And he still wants to die. He realizes he's at the end of his life. What does he do? He proceeds to save some white girl. Her parents had just gone off to do other things. And she's sick with a fever. And she starts going into delirium, and he takes her and puts her in the water trough to cool her down. And everyone's thinking he's trying to drown her because they're unsophisticated. They're white people, of course. That's the noble savage mythology. Festus has to step in and say, no, that's an Indian remedy. He's trying to keep her from dying, basically. You see this fixation all throughout literature and film. It was promulgated in part to try to draw the United States together for civic purposes. It's literal propaganda. That's why it became a thing. And then the Hollywood producers that rub elbows with the politicians, they helped to design that. Before that, it was basically an artistic movement. But it was never really real. Then you have the magical Negro, most prominent in Stephen King works. Try to find a Stephen King work that doesn't have a magical black person with special powers or special insight. Have you ever seen The Shining? I know that Kubrick pissed Stephen King off by making that movie and completely warping it out of proportion. What do you see there? Well, nobody understands that this kid can see cool magical stuff and understand, has premonitions and things like that and can read energy. Except the black dude. And of course he speaks in a very southern ebonic tone. What about The Stand? Have you ever seen the made-for-TV, very shitty adaptation of The Stand? You see the same exact thing. Book was very good, but there is a magical Negro in there that helps the white people to promulgate civilization. You need the help of basically Aunt Jemima. This is a repeat feature in multiple Stephen King works. He seems to be very taken by the concept. And he ain't the only one. The idea of having some sort of wise person outside of the mainline culture who tries to give advice and things go disastrously wrong when they're not listened to probably rears its ugliest head and is most notable in a much more recent film, which is Gremlins. Have you ever watched it? What do you have? You've got some materialistic, yuppie, middle-class white dude who finds the Mogwai and the wise Chinese man shop. And he wants to buy it for his kids because it's cute and stuff. And he doesn't want to sell it because he realizes, God, these white people, they're going to do the wrong thing and we're going to have a gremlin invasion. What ends up happening? They get the Mogwai, they give it water and or food at the wrong time or something along those lines, and then all hell breaks loose. And in the end, the wise Chinese man's like, I told you so. This, during the 80s, by the way, is also propagandistic. It took on a government tone. I'll tell you what happened. The United States was trying to open China up to Western trade and to better economic relations without addressing their authoritarianism, of course, in the process, because the government was trying to become more abusive here as well. And so all of a sudden you get this plethora of movies where there's this wise, look at the Karate Kid or something, wise Chinese man instructs white person in the right way to do things. What do you think it was? It was basically giving a goddamn reach around while sucking someone off. It's literal propaganda. We've seen this many, many, many times. We see this especially in cinema more than anything else. Although with the magical Negro trope, often it's books and then they're made into movies. Like 3 or 4 of Stephen King's books, literally following that same basic methodology. It's very interesting. It's an inversion of how things were seen in prior eras, and it's always done for a political purpose. I remember, do you remember Animal Farm, for example? A book about the communist regime in Russia and how abusive it was. Did you know that the CIA pestered incessantly the people that developed the movie that was released in the 90s? Did you know that? Most people don't. There was a canvassing of that in Mad Magazine, actually, back in the day. I remember that. The CIA and the government in general pestered them incessantly to change the plot line so as not to piss off the Russians. This is a cultural icon of anti-Soviet literature that was deliberately screwed around with, and it ended up with a shitty movie. It's almost unwatchably shitty. Simply to not piss people off for socio-political reasons. Again, the stereotypes and the tropes that you see in there were designed for civic reasons. They were designed for political reasons. The noble savage mythology, beyond its original artistic origin, really became nothing more than a cultural rallying point for people that in some cases, the original romanticists would have chewed up and spit out. Do you think that those people that love the rural existence would have clung onto the woke progressivism of today that comes mainly out of urban centers? It was literally, they didn't even like urban centers. They wanted to go out and live in the woods and paint with the colors of the wind. The magical Negro trope is really nothing more than having your own personal Friday to help you out. And yeah, he's a little bit uncouth and stuff, but he's got magical powers. You know, it's important to include an element of magic when you're writing something completely fantastical. Some people do this better than others. And the wise Chinese master thing is literally nothing more than a late Cold War fixture designed to fix economics between the US and the Eastern Bloc. It's very, very interesting. Maybe I should make a whole series about the subject. That's about all. Peace out.